We're on. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. And once I post this on YouTube, you'll see an overlay, or I might just leave it as a black screen, depending on how lazy or, active I feel. But I'm joined by a guest, Kevin from FCS Nation, the Twitter account, and the radio show. And Kevin, do you mind just giving some background on yourself and your show and just really anything?
Well, I grew up around Citadel football, and when I was a kid, you found out about other FCS teams because the Southern Conference was pretty much the SEC of what was then 1AA. You had Marshall in the league, then Georgia Southern, App State, Furman was really good. So you would see these teams in the playoffs every year, from out west, Montana State, so you had a pretty good feel of what was going on nationally then just by being a fan of a SoCon team. And so I grew to love what was then 1AA football, then FCS football. I'm a Citadel Bulldog fan, always have been. And, for me, I like the way that we do things at our level. I mean, the next level up is fine for what it is. But, there's a lot of inequality and inequity at that next level up. The line between the haves and the have-nots is way larger than it is in our subdivision. And, with the 12-team playoffs supposedly coming, well, big-time football is kind of moving in the right direction, I guess, for a true playoff. But we've done it at this level for a long time, and our national champion is the last team to win a football game. And that's the way it ought to be. It's the way it is in every other sport where, you have a true playoff and not just, what some computers decided before or a bunch of guys in a smoke-filled room deciding who's good and who deserves to play and who doesn't. I like our playoff system, and I like the schools. And for the most part, FCS football is played by kids who, maybe are an inch or two shorter than their counterparts at the big schools, maybe a half a step slower. But it's still really good football. And if you watch NFL football, you'll see just how many guys come from our level. If you can play, they will find you.
Yeah, I think that's an outstanding point for sure. And it's kind of a shame. With the spring season, everyone's saying that the spring season should be a permanent move when really, like, these schools have been producing great talent all along and really just great football. I mean, for one, I grew up near Holy Cross, 10 minutes away from a good old Fitton Field, which, I mean, I can't bring myself to call it a dump, but it was great football. And then just being in college in the Northeast on weekends, just getting out to the Ivy League stadiums, I came to love FCS football again. So glad you're on, Kevin. And you mentioned Citadel on the phone beforehand. You're giving me a hard time as a West Point grad about the Citadel Army series, how it took a pandemic for us to continue the series. So I'll let you speak on that a little bit.
Well, it was 92. Citadel goes up there to Mikey Stadium, beats Army, beats them the next year. Then 2 years after that, Army wins on the last-second field goal. And, it had been since 1994 that the two teams have played. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. What are there? 5 Division I senior military colleges in the country? And the Military College of South Carolina can't get a game with Navy because they beat them back-to-back in the 80s. Air Force, we've gone out there and given them a much harder time than they ever wanted. But, it's kind of, those games should be played every once in a while because they're special. There's something different about those games. And, the people care about it. And, look, when Mikey Stadium was packed that day, when I was there, and Jeff Trend kicked a long field goal for Citadel to win, it was grudging respect. And, that's kind of the way it is between those schools. The Citadel and VMI, it's a rivalry, but there's not a lot of hatred in it. There's a lot of mutual respect, and you want to beat them, and they want to beat you, mostly because you're almost exactly alike. Now, the Citadel and Furman, that's different. There is some hatred there. I tell people on the show every year, when they talk about how great their rivalry is, well, I always say it's not really a rivalry unless there's been a mascot murder on the side of the road, and that's happened in the Citadel Furman series. If anyone's read those books by Pat Conroy, they know that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, too. And, again, that grudge and respect, I totally relate to that, especially after this year's game. I mean, only the core of cadets in the stands. I got to say, the Bulldogs gave a tough game to the cadets. I mean, and we weren't expecting it. We really weren't. But yeah, no, I totally agree with the senior military colleges getting together more. I mean, I know we play VMI a lot, but that's because we can beat them. They haven't beat us since 1981, so we're comfortable with them. But hopefully there's more Citadel games in the future. But moving on to our main topic and why I have you on here, Kevin. In the slow drag of summer offseason college football news, the Big Sky announced a television deal, as you're well aware of. And that took them away from Pluto TV, which was convenient but had its share of production problems, onto ESPN and ESPN Plus for their streaming. So I kind of want to know your initial thoughts on the deal.
I think it's a good move, and some people will disagree. Well, I think most of the disagreement was, well, if you're not going to improve the production of some members of the league, we were getting it for free, and now you want us to pay for schools that we don't need to name. They know who they are, who didn't put as much of a financial focus on creating a very good quality product for Pluto TV. Some really did, and some just really didn't. But it's my understanding from Big Sky Deputy and from the commish there that there's going to be a study done, who has what, who needs what, and ESPN is going to be I don't know if they're going to tote the mail themselves or if they're just going to help, but there is going to be an audit done of who does what well, who does not do well, who has what equipment, who needs what, and there will be some help, if not outright purchased by ESPN, to bring everyone to the same standard. Now, the Southern Conference has a deal with ESPN and ESPN Plus for that. And the first year, there were some schools in that league where it was kind of rough. There's no reason to, not be frank about it. There were some schools that it was not a quality product. Well, they saw that and they fixed it. And now the SoCon has something called the Next Star Game of the Week, where they put one game from that Saturday slate on 5 to 7 of the CW stations, regular over-the-air TV stations in the South, and they use the same equipment that they would use for an ESPN Plus broadcast. They bring in Pete Hannity and some other more well-known announcers than the ESPN Plus games get. So the standard is good enough that the ESPN Plus broadcast of Southern Conference football can be put on regular TV, and you don't realize that you're not watching a ESPN production.
Yeah, I think I agree as well. Anytime where you have the schools sort of footing the bill for production services, it's not going to end out well in most cases. And I think we saw that in the mid-2010s from an FBS perspective with Conference USA TV. Very short-lived, but some of the production quality was just absolutely awful. Just remember seeing tweets about it. You bring a good point about the Next Star Game of the Week, and something that I like about this Big Sky deal is sort of the combination where the Big Sky can have their cake and eat it too. Like, they can have their regional Game of the Week on Root Sports and then broadcast it to a national audience on ESPN Plus at a low price too. And I agree with the Next Star Game of the Week. Very great production quality. In this spring, watching just more football than I could bargain for it. I tuned into many of those Next Star Game of the Weeks, and production quality was great. And really, the syndication, it's a good model for teams building regional brands when exactly a national brand isn't really in sight for a lot of these FCS schools unless you're like North Dakota State or Perennial Power.
Well, and also, you make a very good point there, Omar, but also, they also are going to but they're going to put a couple of Big Sky games on ESPNU. Now, that'll create some controversy over which ones. I imagine that one of them will definitely be the Brawl of the Wild, Montana versus Montana State, because, in that one, you're either going to play in front of 27,500 in Washington Grizzly Stadium or about 23,500 in Bozeman. So that's going to obviously look good on television. What the other one is going to be on ESPNU is, who knows? You would think maybe Idaho State would get some play there, or maybe one of the California schools, the Causeway Classic or something like that, maybe. But, there is going to be that option for them to put some of these games, at least 2 was the contract, I believe, on ESPNU. And you mentioned Root Sports. Man, I'll tell you, Root Sports broadcast, if it didn't say Root in the top of the screen, you would think you were watching the SEC game of the week. The camera angles are perfect. The announcers are great. It's a very quality product, and I'm glad to see that the Big Sky kept that thing going with Root, because it's been a good thing for both of them, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I didn't forget to mention the 2 ESPNU games, which is huge. Now that I think about it, only a few conferences have national television, like I guess, regular national television appearances aside from the playoffs. I can think of the SWAC and MEAC, of course, the Ivy League, Patriot League is kind of iffy, but that's huge. The national TV appearances are huge, and you mentioned the Brawl of the Wild for sure. That one other game, I think ESPNU can do a lot for the Big Sky by putting it with a double header for the Ivy League game of the week that they usually broadcast on ESPNU. I mean, I guess it would be cool. You see, on the East Coast, you get traditional powers. I guess Cornell and Penn for the early game at 6 o'clock, and then right after at 9:30, like you mentioned, maybe a Idaho State or the Causeway Classic, or really just Eastern Washington lighting it up at Roos Field.
Well, look, the people either really like the red turf or they really dislike it. I like it myself. It had faded just a little bit, so they replaced it this off season, and I thought it was really a good fundraiser for them. And Eastern Washington needs money for the athletic program, so I bought a couple of pieces of it. You could buy a couple of pieces of the red turf if you wanted to. So I kept one, and I gave one to my Grizz fan buddy, Joel Johnson, and he uses it as for him to wipe his feet on before he comes in his house. So, I think that was pretty good, too. But, look, the thing about the Big Sky is that, you have, I don't think a lot of people realize that UC Davis is like a top 7 university in the country. Not in the West, not in, just one particular field. I mean, UC Davis is one of the best schools in this country. And, they put people in the NFL from when they were Division II. And they have good players, and they have good coach in Dan Hawkins, who's one of the best ones in the country. So, Davis is a rising power. I think that's a sleeping giant. They've been pretty darn good in football lately. But they have the ability to recruit kids to that particular institution who are high academic kids, but great athletes too. And, you mentioned the Ivy League, and, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, look, I don't have a love affair with the Ivy League. Neither does my co-host. Neither does most of FCS football. And the reason being that no participation in the playoffs, starting their season 3 weeks to a month later than everyone else. I wish the Ivy League would get on board with the rest of us. I think the playoffs would be better if they would participate. And the reasons that they give with, can't interfere with academics, well, that doesn't hold a lot of water, does it? When you send your basketball team to the NCAA tournament, you'll send your track and field team, your lacrosse team, your field hockey team to the NCAA tournament. And I don't know exactly why the reason is they don't want to participate in the playoffs. I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, it may have been because fear of being run out of the stadium by some of the top teams in FCS. But if you listen to other people who know this subdivision, they'll tell you that they think that Princeton a couple of years ago could have played with anybody in the subdivision. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but, we still look up during the football season, Omar, and see an Ivy League team in the top 10 usually, sometimes in the top 6 or 7. And it bothers me because they're the only ones that don't have to prove they belong there. They really don't play anyone out of conference except for the Patriot League. You're starting to see some teams in that conference schedule some better teams. I think VMI opens with Princeton this year. That'll be very interesting. So, that's my take on the Ivy. Do I watch their game? Yes. But do I grudgingly the whole time say, man, I wish they'd get in the playoffs and get on board to train with the rest of us? I think I say that a lot more than I enjoy the game, to be quite frank with you.
And you're hurting me a bit there, Kevin. Geez, I love the Ivy Leagues. Growing up watching, or the Ivy Leagues, Ivy League schools. Growing up watching Holy Cross at Fitton Field, and they compete with Ivy League schools. I remember this one game they had Mike McLeod ran for 256 yards and 40 carries against Holy Cross, and I remember just looking at my dad saying, "Will this ever end?" For Yale. But I mean, I do agree with that. But I can say I do think the Ivy League looks romantically on the past. Before the de-emphasis. They're looking back at the Rose Bowls in the 1910s and stuff like that, and if they're gonna play in the postseason, it has to match that prestige. So I do think that might be the reason, but who knows? I agree that the Ivy League's talent and some of the teams they put on the field, especially Coach Murphy's Harvard teams in past years, amazing, and that Princeton team as well back in 2018 and also 2019 to some degree. I would like to see them in the playoffs, but they're definitely reaping the benefits of their TV deal. And, maybe with the Big Sky and this increased money, increased exposure, even if it's just by only 2 games, and the countless number of ESPN Plus appearances, maybe that allows them to, I don't even think they need to catch up, but gain fans in the East Coast, because I'm sure West Coast bias still exists with the FCS. I mean, you know better than I would.
It's funny because most of the time people talk about East Coast bias in the FCS. So, it's there everywhere. But, look, the best teams in our subdivision are now located west of the Mississippi River. NDSU, both Montanas. You have some teams in Texas. This is not a subdivision anymore where, the Carolinas and Georgia and those particular things run it. I mean, Delaware is getting back to being Delaware again, which the whole subdivision's better when Delaware's good. So, it's interesting that you say, West Coast bias, because that is a recent thing, or, Midwestern bias. It used to be that folks out here, I was in Montana now, complained that, people didn't see their games as often. Kind of the same things you hear about college basketball, right? The people who are voting the top 25 who live in SEC country, or even in football, are not staying up for a 10:30 kickoff of the Pac-12, right? So they don't see it as much. So I get what you're saying. But, it's funny to hear you talk about the Ivy League waxing romantically about the past. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, so boy, I get that better than just about anybody, right? About waxing romantically about the past. Charleston does it better than anyone. But it's at some point, it's one of those things that really sticks in my craw. I would love to see the SWAC and the MEAC participate in the playoffs too, but I understand why they do what they do with the Celebration Bowl. It's important. It brings in a lot of money. But I do like the fact that the NCAA and the FCS and the playoff committee has left that door open. If a SWAC team or a MEAC team is good enough in their mind to qualify, the runner-up of the 2 leagues not participating in the Celebration Bowl, well, they're eligible for the playoffs. And I think that as we see more and more eyes get on the SWAC, the MEAC may be falling apart. I mean, North Carolina A&T going to, the Big South is a huge deal. The growth of the WAC and the A-Sun is going to be a huge deal there too. But I think as you see more eyes get on the SWAC because of Deion Sanders and some other reasons, you might see, if Jackson State wins the SWAC title and, one of the Alabama schools, finishes second, well, they might be good enough, and in a lot of years, I think they are going to be good enough to get one of those at-large berths. And that's why I like 24 teams versus what we did this spring with just 16. I think 24 teams is a good number. I think that, you have an opportunity if you can get on a roll. And, the fact that teams are playing in leagues that, maybe aren't as good from top to bottom as some of the other leagues are, that doesn't mean the second-place team in the SWAC isn't a good team that can win a couple of games in the FCS playoffs. I believe that in the future that is going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure on that. And just looking at this spring, I mean, I think 16 was logical given the amount of teams that had played. I forget. I think the number was in the 80s, so 16 made sense. But I think Southern was screwed from the playoffs, honestly, especially after the that dominant performance in the Bayou Classic. I mean, I was watching that, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but seeing that game, that was like the lowest I've seen a Proud program ever fall. Arguably, with the way Grambling played, I mean, that's just not the G-men that you know of. But, and again, I think that's a consequence of the money, gradually from the Celebration Bowl. And, who knows, the Big Sky can reap that too in terms of recruiting and just everything that falls behind. So a question I have to follow up with this. Immediately when I saw the news, I thought about the CAA, the Colonial Athletics Association, and their deal with Flow Sports, with them as the main broadcast partner. And I just don't think that's a beneficial deal. Do you think that the CAA is lagging behind, or do you see them, I guess, just being just fine the way they are, just renegotiating in a few years?
I think Flow Sports is still loading. So, or buffering. So I don't know whether I'm knowing. Well, I do know enough to answer the question, but you get where I'm going, right? What may have seemed like a great deal when, it was first signed. And I think the people that really are getting the short end of the stick on that is James Madison, because they had their own deal, kind of like Northern Arizona has with NAU TV, and their stuff was good. It was, you never had a problem with it buffering. You could watch the JMU game, and it looked good. And then they go to Flow Sports, and, it just isn't as good of a product. And I don't know how long that deal has left on it, but it's one of the reasons why you hear James Madison people talking about wanting to get out of the CAA is, they can't seem to get a media rights deal done in a way that people can actually watch it without the buffering problems or, losing audio for a quarter or just freezing up completely. And, James Madison is too good of a brand, and so are several other schools in the CAA, to have that be, how people have to watch their games. And it's a shame. I don't know what the solution is, but, I just think that it would shock me if the CAA went back with Flow Sports when this deal expires, whenever that is. It's just not very good.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll be honest, this spring season, I didn't watch a single CAA game that they had rights to. I watched Delaware State, Delaware, but that was nationally televised on ESPN too. And if you think about it, like, the markets exist in the CAA. Like, there are, at least for football, basketball as well. You got Northeastern in Boston, but in football, you got Stony Brook in New York City. And New York City, it's a large market. I'm not saying that that's Stony Brook's market, but it's a competitive market because Syracuse has been a sleeping giant for years. Rutgers doesn't look to be rising to be that dominant brand in the city. Army football, they're great, but I just don't see them being that dominant brand either. So Stony Brook, with a deal with ESPN Plus or a regional partner, that could go a long ways too. I remember seeing occasionally in the fall a tape-delayed Columbia game on SNY. The CAA doesn't have anything like that, at least in the New York market. And there's other markets you can point to there as well, like Villanova with Philadelphia, even though it's a Penn State dominant market. Delaware has the whole state of Delaware, at least for now, until Delaware State, becomes good. But I really think it's hurting the conference too, like you, and they're just not taking advantage of these markets. And something that interests me is their deal with CBS Sports for basketball. And I'm wondering if they can carry that into college football in the fall, because looking at the CBS Sports Network, they don't have much inventory, at least in my opinion. They have Conference USA. They're the lead broadcaster of the Mountain West. They have the service academies, and then they have UConn. And some of those UConn games aren't looking very attractive, except for the Holy Cross one. I gotta mention that, being biased. But yeah, like, I think the CBS Sports Network, if they can link with them somehow, but I don't see it happening, if they can link them somehow to get some of their games there, I think that can do the conference a great amount of positive movement. Jeez, messing up my words. But I kind of want to know your thoughts. Like, if they get a better deal, do you think they could emerge in some of the markets that they're in?
There's no reason why not. You're talking about, just take Delaware, for example. That's a flagship state university, right? Even if it is FCS. So there ought to be, casual fans in the state of Delaware who would tune into a Delaware game on a Saturday afternoon, you would think. But, it's just pro football dominates so much up there, doesn't it? That, if you're not Penn State, are you going to get a lot of eyes, you think, Omar?
Yeah, and maybe not Villanova. I think Villanova was a bad example, but I think Stony Brook, like New York's been ripe for the taking for a very long time with Stony Brook.
Look, I like what the Seawolves have done. The last fall season, they came within a whisker of beating James Madison and throwing the whole CAA into just a conundrum. So, that I like what the Seawolves have done. And like you said, they have an opportunity. Someone needs to be New York's college football team, right? And they have as good of an opportunity as anybody. But look at what LIU's done. Merrimack, right? Would you have believed 15 years ago that those would be Division I football programs?
No, I wouldn't have. In fact, I just heard of Merrimack like a couple years ago. I know that's kind of sounds bad that I lived in Massachusetts for almost a decade, but I hadn't heard of Merrimack until they moved D1.
Well, you mentioned UConn earlier, and you're from Massachusetts. Do you think there's any opportunity down the line that those two schools might decide that UMass has been horrible as an FBS program, haven't they? Like one of the worst. And they won a national championship at our level. So what's better, being everyone's homecoming honey, or playing for something? I think everyone knows what my answer is, but I just think that even UMass people are going to have to come to that conclusion at some point, don't you?
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. I love that term, homecoming honey. I never heard that one before. I think with UConn it's a bit harder because they do have that Big East clout, and they have a solid TV deal. I'll face it and I'll admit it. I kind of gravitate towards not liking UConn because they see themselves as what Army is, the preeminent Northeastern independent, and I hate that because they're not. You just can't come in after a few bad seasons like they've had and just say that. But I digress. They have a solid TV deal, so I think they can fold. They get home games against Power 5 schools at Rentschler. UMass, on the other hand, it's like, especially during this pandemic season, I was really scratching my head at them scheduling some of these games and taking these beatings on national TV. Like, it was really confusing for me.
The things that we do for money, right? But that I've often wondered that. And we discussed it off air about, some of the teams that have left the Southern Conference. Appalachian State and Georgia Southern, their last year in the SoCon, they finished in the bottom half. And then they move up the next year. Now, they weren't eligible for the Sun Belt Championship, but unless my memory is incorrect, which could be, I'm getting a little older, I think that they were either 1-2 or 1-3 finishing in that league, ineligible for the Sun Belt crown with Southern Conference players. But for every Boise State, there's UMass or a UConn. And, I think even Boise State is scratching their head right now looking for a better conference home. But I just think that what we're going to see is everybody talks about realignment and, what could happen. But I think we are really going to see sometime 15 years maybe, we're going to see what people have been saying is going to happen for a while. And you'll see the big boys or the P5s take their ball and leave the NCAA. And then I think if you're part of that second tier, you need to position yourself as well as you can to continue to play at the second highest level. So I think that's what we'll see happen. And look, when you have teams, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Michigan, those people of the world, and people say, well, is it really an upset when someone from the group of five goes in there and plays them tough or, maybe beats one of those teams? Well, people say, but they operate under the same rules. But do they really? Yes, they get the same amount of scholarships. But is it really the same at Alabama as it is at UMass or UConn. I don't think so. But, I think that once that happens, you will see, like I said, people try to position themselves in the next few years to try to remain playing at the second highest level, which is what most people want to do who are not Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Florida, that bunch.
That'll be interesting to see for sure. And I've heard talks about that, whether it be the perpetual Group of 5 playoff talks, which I definitely oppose. But I mean, the chasm's only growing by each day, and maybe the 12-team playoff will help that chasm kind of I guess decrease. But we'll see. I mean, I do see that happening as well with some of these conference alignments not really being beneficial. But go again with conference realignment. I want to ask. You mentioned with James Madison fans saying when they leave the CAA. I kind of want to know what timetable for that, and also maybe a conference target, because I've heard things that they'd be a good fit in the MAC if the MAC ever chooses to expand. Or do you see them going to like maybe down to the SoCon again? Or I don't know if they were ever in the SoCon, so I shouldn't say again, but going to the SoCon, because the SoCon shaping up to be a great. I mean, it's always been a great college football conference.
I would think that if they're interested in moving up, which it seems that, when you read Twitter and talk to people, that they're very interested in the American Athletic Conference. I'm not sure that the interest is mutual. Harrisonburg isn't that large of a TV market, but I would like to think that the other Group of 5 leagues wouldn't do what Conference USA did, which was they just chased TV markets, not good quality teams. And look at where Conference USA is now. I mean, it is a lot of years rated below several FCS conferences as far as strength goes. So I would like to see, if James Madison's going to leave our subdivision, I would like to see them go to some place where it's worth it, and where, they're not just going to FBS so that they can beat their chest and say, we're FBS. And I think that that's their plan is, they'll wait around and see what happens. I think North Dakota State is in that same boat. Both Montana schools are as well. Is the Mountain West really a step up for Montana and Montana State? I'm not sure the answer to that. And I think if I'm going to spend the money that's necessary, do the things, adding sports to be able to get to the requisite number to be an FBS school, I think that it would have to clearly be a step up, not maybe just a little bit above a lateral move. But look, I think that if you're going to talk about some realignment at the FCS level, I would love to see JMU and VMI be in the same league and play every year. You add Chattanooga, Furman, Citadel. Maybe you go and grab Kennesaw if they're unhappy in that A-Sun. And you do what the SoCon has always done, which the SoCon's always been a group of schools that are very unsimilar in a lot of ways, but make it work because you can bus everywhere. The longest bus trip in the SoCon for the Citadel is to Birmingham, Alabama. And, that's not all that short of a trip, but you can bus it, and they do. And that makes a huge difference in your bottom line, not having to fly everywhere, which is a problem for the Big Sky schools. The Montana schools can, when you added Idaho back in, that gave them another school that the Montana schools can bus to. I mean, it must be very expensive to have to send your lacrosse team to Portland, to have to send your other non-revenue sports teams to Flagstaff, Arizona. So I think we're going to see after this pandemic is over that you'll have a lot of schools who are looking at their conference mates going, we don't really have much in common with them, and they're a long way away. Let's try to get back to more geographic leagues in all sports, and I think you'll see that happen eventually.
Yeah, no, I'd be interested to see that. We saw that a bit with the MEAC, where Bethune-Cookman, Florida A&M got tired of going to Delaware and Maryland and, the other non-football schools up there in the Mid-Atlantic. That brings up a great point for sure. I think the league that has it right at the moment. I think, like you said, the SoCon for sure. I didn't know that the shortest bus ride was from Charleston out to Birmingham with Sanford. That's great to know for sure. That definitely is great for the check for I guess the expenses. But I think the Ivy League again, and I think the Patriot League, they both have it right for sure, because the Patriot League, not only are they really condensed, but they're like-minded schools. They don't really place that much stake in football for that matter. I mean, they're academics for a reason. But that'll be interesting to see with this pandemic for sure. As we near to a close, Kevin, it's been a true pleasure having you on. And do you have anything to really add to our conversation? Anything about FCS football or about the Citadel or the triple option team? I'm a huge triple option fan, and I do enjoy watching Citadel play whenever they play FBS schools.
You know, it's interesting whenever I interview coaches, and and you ask them, how does it feel when you know that your opponent knows what's coming, but if you execute it, they can't stop it? And I know you watch that with your Black Knights, right?
Yeah.
they know it's going to be triple to the left or to the right, or the V-back's going to get it 99.9% of the time. But, it's about execution, it's about toughness, and it's about grit. And, that's one of the things that I really like about senior military college football. VMI is trying to do it a little bit different way. And, it works for the T-Dets, obviously. Won their first Southern Conference championship in a long, long time this spring. And, so you have to look at it that there's not just one recipe for success. There can be several of them. And one of the things that I would just like to reiterate to folks who are listening to this is, this is FCS football. It's good football. It's entertaining. It's played by players who can play. And just go out, and if you have an FCS team somewhere in your backyard, you can probably afford to take a family of four to that game and not spend $900. That's not possible in a lot of places, right? It's good entertainment, it's good football, and it's played mostly by kids who you wouldn't mind having over to your house to have a meal in your kitchen table. And, I think that's a good deal, and it's good football, and I really wish people give it a chance. If you do, the next thing you know, you'll be one of us, part of FCS Nation, and I hope you do. Thanks for having me, Omar.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Kevin. And I'm hoping to make my way down to a bunch of SoCon games. I'm going to be in Georgia during the fall for my training, and I will say SEC ticket prices are expensive, but more expensive than I thought, and it's not a good thing. So I will be frequenting SoCon, and I'm looking forward to the Military Classic of the South. I will say as a joke, it does lose a bit of attention to America's game up north, but definitely a great rivalry that I'm looking forward to heading to.
Well, I know this. The guys that wear silver, blue, and white want their trophy back. I know that. So it's been 2 long years that it's resided up there in the Shenandoah Valley, and those boys want their trophy back. I know that.
Yeah, I'm excited for it too. I mean, I love the Citadel powder blue. I will say that. I mean, you guys may have copied our uniforms, and I always joke about that whenever I see an ad for the Citadel. But man, you guys do football uniforms so well.
Copied your? Well, okay. Okay. All right, you got me there. And you know what? After that, I got nothing else to say. How about that?
All right. I'm sorry if I touched your nerve, Kevin, but thank you so much for coming.
No. I just think it's funny. And I would be remiss if I let you get away with calling it powder blue. No, sir, that's Citadel blue.
Okay.
And the good Lord made the sky the color of His favorite team. There you go.
That's great. No, that's awesome. I mean, I can't really say that about West Point black and gold or even gray. They throw in the gray in the rotation sometimes.
Sometimes when I see y'all play, I would have to go, is that Wofford? Oh no, it's Army.
Wofford. That's good. I don't think I can say anything now. But it's definitely a good one. Thanks again, Kevin, for sure. And you got an honorary Citadel fan here. They earned my respect this fall.
I appreciate you having me, Omar. Thank you, friend.
Thank you.